Thank you all for those answers. Yeah, give it up. All right, we'll go back to Ivy. So during the pandemic, you made the career shift from working full-time at Texas Civil Rights Project, that's how we first met, to full-time creative, working on your podcast and then producing comedy shows. Can you speak to what motivated that decision and what you've learned from it, making that shift from full-time activist to full-time comedy?
Mostly, it's because working in civil rights in Texas is a terrible fucking job.
Lots of comedy, though, right?
No. Has anybody heard of secondary trauma? Are we a primary trauma crowd? I'm a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, okay? I highly recommend the book for activists here in the room. It's called Trauma Stewardship. It really helped me come up with ways to cope with the sacrifices that I was having to make working on the front lines of border justice, criminal justice and abolition, and weirdly voting rights. I didn't know voting rights could fuck you up that bad. But yeah, no, right? Like just even doing the press clips report, right, for the organization, because I was working in narrative change at that time. Most of my career has been in narrative change, right? So narrative change is when you're kind of like framing, you're like kind of shifting the frame of civic discourse so that it moves the window, what we call the Overton window in this line of work, that moves or broadens or moves it closer to it's the window of what the public thinks is possible. Do you know what I mean? So like it used to be that like don't ask, don't tell was like the height of like liberal possibility. Do you know what I mean? And because they're like, well, like the best we can do to balance all of these valid interests, right, is to just like, don't ask, don't tell me. So the Overton window is the window of civic discourse of what's possible. And so I was doing narrative change to change that. For example, we have a narrative that like criminals are less than human. And therefore can be put away and disappeared. And anybody that you turn into a criminal, you can do anything that you want to do to them. And so we are criminalizing voting, we're criminalizing abortion, we're criminalizing immigration, which is literally just changing your address, right? But now that we've made it a crime to change your address in that way, now we're allowed to do whatever we want, including putting them in prisons for what is a civic, what should be like a ticketable offense, right? We're filling up prisons that are no longer serving as state and federal prisons because they don't meet the building standards for those prisons any longer, and so we are putting immigrants we do not have to imprison them. We're using our discretion to imprison them and keep those buildings in use, and people are okay with that because we have decided that that's what these people are. They're lawbreakers and they're criminals and they're infringing our social contract. So that's what narrative change does. And to do that, you have to bear witness to a lot of terrible, terrible things and then decide what to do with them bit by bit, and which of these stories are worth like putting forward, to the public and explaining in certain ways, or you see problematic journalists like talking about them in a way that is not helpful toward a solution to the problem or whatever, to help educate them on the nuances of the issues and things like that. So I was interviewing clients at the Texas Civil Rights Project. I was doing all this stuff, and I was really starting to bring that work home. But I stuck it out until the election because it was just that kind of time in my country, and the time it demanded sacrifice, and we made those sacrifices. And then I left and never turned back. And the reason why, so that's why I left. The reason why I never turned back is, I would say, in just my first 1.5 years of doing comedy full time, I was able to affect as much impact and change as, I wouldn't say like my entire narrative change career, but in my culture career, which is basically what being an artist is culture change, right? And by doing culture change instead of narrative change, I feel like it's like 1.5 years is equivalent to maybe 4 years of the work that I was doing then. And I am having so much more fun too. Yeah, so that's why I'm here.
So are you saying like my over 10 years in comedy can equate to like 40 years of law school? Like I can tell my mom that? Because like I'm willing to tell my mom that. But yeah,
well, law school isn't affecting change, but that's another conversation.
Well, yeah, that's another panel. That's another day.